Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Sankofa Video Books and Cafe. Here, located at 2714 Georgia Avenue in Washington, D.C., nestled right across the street from the illustrious Howard University. HU? You know. So, my name is Kamal Grimes. I am an employee here at Sankofa, and I am also um, a graduate of Howard University's African Studies Department in my master's degree in 2019. And I'm very excited for the author that we have here today. I'm very excited for the topic and the discussion. So without further ado, let's get a little bit into it. The title of this book here is called The Gifts of Africa: How a Continent and Its People Changed the World, right here with author Jeff Pearce to my right. And let me just read a bit about Jeff, and he can explain more about his background afterwards. All right, so Jeff Pearce.
We have a protester.
Yeah, Sankofa, we actually boast the largest children's book collection for African and African American children's books. Yes. So that was just one of our youth in the back. She actually was cheering, not protesting. Okay, so Jeff Pearce has traveled far to get his unusual and compelling stories. For his popular work of history, Prevail, he tracked down witnesses and survivors of the heroic struggle in Ethiopia against fascist Italy. For his popular biography of Henry Layard, Winged Bull, he traveled across the Middle East and interviewed a Kurdish army commander near Mosul. He has investigated the dangerous realm of street gangs and taught journalism in Myanmar. He has written novels, books on history and current affairs, and stage plays that have been performed in Toronto and Los Angeles. So without further ado, I will introduce author Jeff Pearce. Thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you. Good. Thank you guys for coming out. I appreciate that a lot.
So let's just get started a bit. Before we get into the book, I just wanted to allow you a chance to let people who are not as familiar with you to get a chance to know a little bit about yourself. So can you tell us a little bit about your background and your upbringing and what brought you into this field of African history?
Well, I was never brought up. There was no bringing up. I was born tall, so it was easy that way. No, it's strange for me because I'm a Canadian, originally from a city called Winnipeg, which the snowstorms that you're getting, well, it's going to be what it's going to be like where I come from. And the curiosity, I'm always asked about the curiosity aspect, but the thing is, I'm curious about multiple cultures. If there's something in terms of India, I'm interested in that. If there's something about Africa, I'm interested in that. The town that I grew up in, well, it's a city, but 500,000 people, was incredibly bland and white, and there was no diversity at all. So it was incredibly dull. So you're naturally, and we were a British colony dominion. So the thing is, you sort of, when you have a country that's not even as old as New York bars, the country was, the Confederation started in 1867. You can go into a bar in New York City and you can find bars older than that. So you sort of are like tabula rasa. You don't really have a background. And so it allows you to be a little more interested, more engaging in other cultures and go, okay, well, what's here? What's this history? What's this history? Because you don't really have much of your own. So that's sort of what led me there. This grows out of Prevail. And people here might know me from Prevail, which I understand you guys carry. You do carry Prevail. So Prevail is about the Italian invasion of Ethiopia. What drives me crazy is a lot of people don't know this is a missing chapter of African American history. 20,000 people were marching in Harlem.
Yeah.
August 3rd, 1935. They were marching and protesting in Detroit, Chicago, Los Angeles. When you hear and the lines that Marcus Garvey originally said, that's put in the Marley song, that goes, "Emancipate yourself from mental slavery," that comes from a speech about Ethiopia said in Sydney, Nova Scotia. So there's all these wonderful strands of a chapter, and unfortunately, we, friends of mine, we went to the museum, the African American Museum, and it ain't in there, which is very disappointing, and it should be in there, but it's not. And after Prevail has done quite nicely, it's chugged along nicely for 8 years in print, never had a marketing from the publisher, never had a mainstream reviews. The book lives and dies just because of people like you and chugging along. And now there's a movie option on it, which, knock wood, somebody will make a movie of it one day, but the option just means, they like it. This grew out the idea that people like me, maybe even people like you go through school and you learn about, European civilization. You learn about the Renaissance. You learn about all these great kings, and you learn about England. And nobody ever tells you about African civilization. Nobody ever tells you. They had kings. They had good governance. They had great architecture. They had medical breakthroughs, which I can expand on, but I'll wrap up the answer. But when you see all that, you go, why the hell doesn't anybody know this? So you want to write a book on that. You want to share this with people.
And that's another reason why I was very excited to have this conversation with you, because I think we may be, we're kindred spirits in that sense.
Thanks.
Because I also was fascinated by this missing chapter in African American history in terms of the Italian invasion and the response. And actually, while I was at Howard, I did my research on Ethiopian and African American relations. And those who know me here at Sankofa, they know I've been studying this since 2014. I took me to Ethiopia like 4 different times, was studying in University of Addis Ababa, went to the archives and Institute of Ethiopian Studies, and really just trying to uncover this lost history. And it's really interesting to me because when you look at the position that Ethiopia used to hold among the African American community and in the diaspora, it was a very elevated position. But sometime around the 50s, 60s, I would say in the first half of the 20th century, it was a very elevated position, but towards the second half, it dwindled. And so that's why this history is really not known. So I really commend you for the research that you've done. And segueing from that question, from that statement, what research did you conduct for this book, The Gifts of Africa? And before you talk about the research, can you actually explain to people, what the book is about, how you organized it, and then get into how you researched for it?
Yeah, well, I can answer your research question. Actually, I'll cheat. The research question isn't that difficult. I read. You read. It's out there. You read. It's not that difficult. It's a case of going around to the different sources. It's just nobody's collating the information and organizing it properly. All of this, like I said before, nobody's teaching this properly. They teach it like this is a parade of novelties. They're saying, well, Africans did this. Isn't that cute? And they never say, okay, but there's all these civilizations. And you can watch the progression. You can chart the progression of ideas and innovations from ancient times all the way to modern era. Look, the thing is, the ancient Egyptians write on stone. And they inscribe in stone. And when I was growing up, there was still the argument going on, who invented writing? Was it the Egyptians or was it the Mesopotamians? And I don't give a damn. Who cares? That's not the most interesting thing about it. It's not who invented the writing. Africans invented papyrus, paper. This is where we get the word from. And if you can write on paper, now I can take this, oops, if I don't get caught in my chair. I can take this over here. I don't have to stare at this wall and read. I can take ideas. I can go read in the privacy of my own home. This is a huge innovation. This is the big deal. They always go, well, Mesopotamians invented writing. Yeah, what did they do with it? You know, an African goes, you know, I'd really like to not bother reading the wall when it's 30 above. Well, you guys have a different Fahrenheit schedule, but I'd like to be able to like read at home. You have the privacy of reading now. You know, now you can go, hey, I don't have to rely on what Schmuckface says. I got a piece of paper that I can pull out and prove that this is true. You know, that's what Africans did. Africans were inoculating against smallpox centuries before white people. In Uganda, they had women surviving cesarean sections. By at least the 1800s, they used palm oil as an to clean the area, and they had their own way of sort of inoculating the patient, which is similar to what the Europeans were doing, which was basically getting the poor patient drunk. But the point is, mother and child survived. And nobody, you know, I saw an article around the time that I was writing the book going, the first successful cesarean section might have been done here. No, you didn't even bother to look at whether it was done in Africa or not. You know, you learned about African kings, you learn about English kings, and you learn about, say, the Magna Carta. Who gives a flying rat's? But what we're really talking about is good governance. The Magna Carta, if you had to study in school, is about the king and his barons. It doesn't do anything for the common people. If you were living in certain African kingdoms and you were, you know, Joe Schmuck, you could go in front of the king and make your case, and they had that. The Xhosa people had these legal experts who were like walking encyclopedias of precedents and knowledge, and nobody cares about that. Nobody thinks about that. You guys, I keep butchering the name of the guy, but he's in here. An economist of Ethiopian descent came up with incredible ideas about economic theory. He's in this. And he was admired in Japan. The Americans weren't paying attention to him. The British weren't paying attention to him. But the Japanese came across and they went, oh, this is good. Let's look at these guys' ideas. He lived in the time of Menelik. You can watch the progression of ideas from African civilization, from thought, all the way to today. Why don't we teach that? And that's the message which I keep grinding away on pushing. If any of you came to our events, at, what was it, Busboys and Poets? Yeah, I harp on the same thing, so I apologize if I'm repeating myself to those who were there, but it still needs to be said. We need more bookshops like this, where you can go, this is where you can celebrate not only Black culture, but African culture, but also the innovations of African culture, which is why I keep saying, it's in the book, the West will begin to understand Africa when it realizes it's not talking to a child, it's talking to its mother. You know? So
I had to clap it up for that because that was, I even clapped when I read that. You know, it's interesting. It's great to hear this coming from you as well because, you know, in spaces like Sankofa, we talk about this stuff all the time. You know, we eat, sleep, and breathe this type of ideology. But from the outside, you know, this is a kind of a buffer or a bubble, you know. So can you speak to the importance of getting this information out of you know, just, you know, Afrocentric bubbles like this and getting it to the masses? And
well,
yeah, what's the impact? Is that important, or maybe not masses, but who is this book for?
this book is for everybody. This book is for the problem, the big problem with books, well, hopefully not mine, but the biggest problem of books like this is we're still in a state where people think that, okay, that's very nice, you have this book. And so that people with this complexion are all going to buy this book. That's not the only people I want to read this book. I want people who are like lacking melanin to read this book. I want like white people to read this book. I want Asian people to read this book. I want everybody to read this book so they get it through their skulls. I want this kind of stuff. It doesn't have to be from my book, but I want this taught in schools, in elementary, in junior high, in high school, because you took this kind of stuff in university. By the time you get there, okay, you're starting to become formed as a person. But if you were an impressionable child and you still walk around with these ideas that Africa didn't have any civilization or any great technical, and I've seen this on social media where somebody says, oh, well, what have you done lately? Oh, what have you guys invented? I personally know, and I got witnesses for it, I got two of them in front, we know a guy who's a NASA scientist. He literally is, when you know the expression, he's no rocket scientist, this guy really is a rocket scientist. He's of Ethiopian descent. He's trying to find water on the moon. You know, this guy has been celebrated in articles. That's another, you know, African and now African American person who's coming up with great stuff. So who has to read that book is everybody. And you guys, well, I say you guys collectively as Americans, you're kind of strange because, you know, critical race theory, I begged on about this the other night, is an entirely reasonable point of inquiry. It's an entirely reasonable methodology to look at. You can even extrapolate it to Africa to say, okay, how did they screw around here and mess around with economic systems, legal systems, in terms of architecture? You know, if you went to Addis, what did you see? You saw a bunch of 1960s, 1970s skyscraper crap, which is their importation. You know, we can talk about this with the aid sector. People in this audience, two of my colleagues, we went to, at least one of us, went to Afar, the region, and my colleague, I'm not that bright, he pointed out to me and said, the Afar have their own way of building a house with mats, and the mats keep it cool during the day and hot during the night. So what does UN give them? They give them these plastic sheets of crap that are awful. But boy, the UN logo is on it a lot. And that is critical race theory, because you can see it. It's you'll take what we give you. And so of course people go, oh, this is the way it is. This is the form of, so now you see tents with UN logoing in plastic. So you can break it down. So we have to start like this small. We have to start about junior high, high school, even elementary school, teaching this stuff.
I agree.
You guys are still here. Hopefully I haven't said anything. So by now you should be like going, oh, he's boring.
So let's get into some of the gifts of Africa. Can you, well, this is my question for you. What is your favorite gift of Africa?
Why do people keep asking me that?
It's a good question to ask.
I just told you the story. When you actually think it through, we owe Africa for everything, because this is the testimony. You're reading a book. And every book is a reinforcement of hope. And Africans said, no, let's put it on paper instead of stone, which is, people don't think about that as an innovation. That's huge. You have the privacy of thought now. You have the privacy of reading. You have the mobility of reading. You have the idea of changing reading. If you inscribe it in stone, what? You think like somebody's going to come along with autocorrect and fix it? No, it's stuck there. You're there. But no, somebody comes up with papyrus and says, well, I don't like that. Screws up. An African did that. So I think that's probably the greatest accomplishment of humanity ever. It's not the wheel, you know, okay, you got wheels. This says, hey, I got a diagram of wheels. I got instructions for how to make wheels. That's what Africans did for people. So that if you want to pick me down to a favorite, I think that's probably it. Plus it hopefully, you know, resulted in my profession. So,
So that's great. So paper, from papyrus to paper, and what are some others for those who don't know? So I'm sure some people are listening in. Some people are interested to buy the book. What are some of the gifts other than paper that you will talk about in the book?
You have the medical breakthroughs which I talked about. You have, better remind myself of what I actually wrote. Let's discuss just one other thing that'll make one of my audience happy, because I believe he's very spiritual and faithful. Who is one of the biggest saints that you have in Christianity? He's Augustine. Augustine was an African. Not only that, but he thought of himself as an African. He was from Numidia. You can check it. It's written into the book, but it's quoted in the book in terms of saying, we Africans, and he even describes his physical appearance in terms of having a wider nose than other Romans, blah, blah, blah. This is a guy who wrote the Confessions. He wrote the other great work. But the thing is, in the Confessions, that was about a split between the church at the time. And the way it worked was they were called the Donatists after a particular god. Now, why should anybody care? What happened was the Donatists got ticked off because for a while Domitian was, say, emperor, Christians were doing both Christianity, but they were also keeping their hand in terms of worshiping two pagan gods. So, it's basically a Monty Python sketch where these guys come around and go, oh, you guys getting on? Oh, yes, fine. We're praying to Jupiter and we're praying to Aphrodite. Okay, they're gone. Okay, they go. Now, that didn't make certain people happy. So the thing is that they were doing switch. So after it was over, after, say, you had the final conversion to Christianity in terms of the emperor and so on, they said, okay, these guys who were playing both sides, they shouldn't get their old jobs back. Augustine was educated in Italy, what is now modern Italy. So when he wrote the Confessions, he basically was siding his way with what is now today pretty much the Catholic Church and saying, this is what I believe, and I'm on this side where we forgive and let these people back in the flock. The Numidians in North Africa were going, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to forgive them. And basically, Augustine picked the winning side, but it was actually, when you think about it, this split in Christianity was as important as the break between Catholicism and Protestantism, and it was in Africa. It was huge. We could have gone the other way because there were Africans, Christians, who said, no, you shouldn't allow this. And nobody thinks about that. You and I are talking before the mics and before the live stream about Ben Shapiro. Ben Shapiro references Augustine in his book, The Right Side of History. Doesn't mention at all that the guy's African. Does not have Africa even as a single index entry in his entire book. And he wants to sell that everything comes from Western civilization. That's the type of ignorance you're fighting. That's what you're up against, to the point where they have whitewashed it so completely that an African accomplishment is erased. So you don't even have that. And you got to push back and go, excuse me, jackass, over here. No, African guy. So that.
That actually leads me to a follow-up question, and then I probably have one more question, and then I want to open the floor to the audience, because I believe the audience has questions and comments. My question,
or critiques.
My question is, you mentioned some contributions from Egypt, from Egyptians. You did mention some from Uganda. I think you mentioned from South Africa.
Yeah, South Africa's in there.
So you definitely did a variety.
Yeah.
But my question is about the North Africa. So like Egypt, and then Augustine, he is from Numidia, which is like Northern Africa, if I'm not mistaken, like Tunisia, Libya.
Called the Maghreb now. Yeah.
Tunisia, Libya area.
Mm-hmm.
So oftentimes these parts of Africa are disconnected with Africa. North Africa oftentimes is grouped in the Middle East and Sahara Desert is looked at as an impenetrable barrier between Black Africa, so-called, and
Except for the trade
civilized
caravans that went
Africa.
through it all the time.
Except for when they had to get
Yeah.
slaves, then they
Or
could
bring out gold. I mean, it's like, it's impenetrable, but we need people. Yeah.
Yeah. So, how do you address? Because I've seen, I grew up Catholic,
Okay.
so we know about Saint Augustine or Saint Augustine, but oftentimes you see him depicted as a white person.
Ignorance.
So how do you? Yeah, and also the same with the Egyptians. So how do you address these? I'm sure you've maybe gotten critiques from people before who are saying, well, oh well, Egypt and Numidia, that's Africa, but that's not Africa. So how do you address those?
Yeah, there's a whole chapter devoted to Cheikh Anta Diop in there because he handled that. And the thing is, first of all, the idea that Egyptians were white and the idea that you can have a Scotsman busy doing roles of ancient Egypt, he's a god and gods of Egypt, and yeah, that we settle for that is just beyond ridiculous. This racial nonsense started around, in actual fact, oh, I lost the, sorry, can you hear me? Hello? Something happened with the mic.
Something happened with it, but
Yeah, something went choke. Well, they can all
in
hear
the
me, but-
meantime,
yeah,
you can
thank
use
you.
mine.
I'll use yours. Yours is warm. Okay. So this crap started in the mid 1800s. And it started around the time that Egyptology became a thing because the French went over to Egypt, mostly because Napoleon said, well, I'm not ready to take on the British yet. Who can I beat up? Oh, let's go to Egypt. And he took some scientists' notes, and then he basically left his own army, and buggered off back to France. He literally ran, the great Napoleon. And all the scientists are going, that's our ride. Wait, oh, bye. And they're all stuck in Egypt. And so they find this great civilization. But now they have a problem because they're black. And they're going, okay, how are we going to get around this? The current people are black. The current people are a mix of different shades. What are we going to do? And so now they go, and this was particularly Americans. The British did it to some extent, but really it was the Americans. And it's in the book in terms of source text so you can check, where these guys said, well, they weren't really black. The ancient Egyptians, no, they were actually Caucasian. And so they start fiddling around this. And it's nonsense because it's ridiculous. But it's accepted. And when the Battle of Adwa took place in 1896, you had, right into the 1930s, even Nikola Tesla, when he was writing an article for Sylvia Pankhurst for the New Times and Ethiopian News, would say, well, the Ethiopians aren't really black, they're Caucasian, they're a race of supermen. Okay, you were a race of supermen, but you were definitely not white. So, no. And all of this was to be able to take credit for these accomplishments and to move it over. So that gets mixed in with all of this nonsense, and it's perpetuated to this day. You can still see it in terms of political discussions over, say, the racial makeup of Sudan, in terms of Arab versus black people. And there's a wonderful writer, I forget his name off the top of my head. He wrote this wonderful book, maybe you guys carry it. It's about Khartoum. River is the word in the title. And he even talks about how the media, when they came over to cover things like Darfur and others, they wanted easy shorthand, and they split it up into those two areas, when it's nothing of the sort. There's much more of a mix. So the answer to any of that is to go do some reading and go check. And even now, we have, with that kind of nonsense, people trying to take credit for African achievements. Yeah, you saw Augustine depicted as a white guy because nobody was reading what he actually wrote. They didn't bother to read him carefully. You still see you see the same nonsense perpetuated today. You know, that you can have a Scottish actor portraying an Egyptian god. Really? So, no.
Appreciate that answer. Definitely, it was very thorough. And if you don't know Dr. Sheikanta Diop or Diop, we say Diop, but really it was a Diop.
Okay.
Oh,
thank you for that. Because
yeah.
I never knew that. Actually.
Yeah, because it's Wolof from Senegal. So I was shouting out a brother I know who has a connection to Senegal.
I learned something.
Yeah, so Sheikanta Diop. And I'm so happy I'm just very happy to be here. I don't know if you guys can tell. Because, I actually, I read a book called, and I wish I would have read your book when I was writing my thesis. I didn't know that it was dealing with African-American involvement with the war in Italy.
Well, just sorry to interject. Are you familiar with William R. Scott's?
That's what I'm about to mention.
Brilliant.
Yeah,
Brilliant
so
book.
That's the book that set me on my path. So there's a book called The Sons of Sheba's Race, African Americans in the Italo-Ethiopian War from 1935 to 1941. Now, I first read that book actually like 9 years ago, and it completely and totally blew my mind. And this is where we found out about this lost legacy and connection between Ethiopia and just the symbolic nature of Ethiopia, the roots of so many different movements, in the world, really. And we didn't know this. Even learning Black history, we didn't know. Even learning African history, we still didn't learn about this. So I was very, very excited. And I did come across, he talked about it in the book, what you're talking about, how they said the Ethiopians were Caucasians. But the interesting thing that they said was, they said they were dark-skinned Caucasians. There was like three. They said brown-skinned Caucasians, Black Caucasians, and dark-skinned Caucasians. And they said this because of some sort of they had a myth called like the myth of the true Negro, which is supposedly someone who only has certain type of facial features, hair texture, things like that. So given the range of complexion within Ethiopia and the range of facial features, they figured even so-called cranial measurements and things like that, they were saying, oh, well, they might look black, but they're not black. Basically. So they had this thing called the Hamite myth, which I found very, very interesting because there's the curse of Ham, and then they have this other thing called the Hamite myth, and they're different. Because the curse of Ham, they were saying that Noah had 3 sons, Japheth, Shem, and Ham. And Ham was supposedly the progenitor of the black races, and he was supposedly cursed. But if you actually read in the Bible, it's not Ham that's cursed. It's Canaan that was cursed. And it wasn't that he was cursed to be black or anything like that. It didn't have anything to do with race. He was cursed for some other reasons, but nothing mentioned about color. So that's false in of itself. But then they were saying that Negroes were not really fully human. That was the argument. So they're saying this Ham is not the progenitor of Negroes. It's the progenitor of the Black Caucasians, which are the Ethiopians, the Somalians, Horn of Africa, people from that region are. So, but that type of mythology, it really messed up some of the solidarity that was being built up between the diaspora and Ethiopia, because with language, especially with Ethiopians maybe not speaking English, it could be confusing, and they maybe never called themselves Negro because that's not a word that they used. So it was just they're like, oh, well, they're saying they say we're not Negro. They say, oh, see, the Ethiopians say they're not black. And they're like, no, we're not saying that. We're Ethiopian.
But it's perpetuated to this day. There's, and credit where credit is due, Prevail. Professor Scott is cited in that. I went to him specially and I said, can I please get your book? And his book was out of print. And his secretary very kindly photocopied the whole damn book and mailed it to me. And he cited it. And so a lot of Prevail relies on his wonderful groundbreaking research. But this brings up a larger question because this crap is still going on. And yes, I know what color I am, but you have white people who still want to undermine you by taking credit for your accomplishments, even if it's research. The flip side, I was asked the other night in terms of white liberalism, and I was ranting on because I had a couple of gin tonics in me. And unfortunately, there's no gin in this drink. Too bad. But the thing is you see this with Fatima Massaquoi is in this book. And Fatima Massaquoi went to Fisk, where her professors tried to rip her off and take her thesis and take her credit. They were already putting her work into their academic papers and not crediting her. Herskowitz, who some people know of, blocked W.E.B. Du Bois from trying to do a black encyclopedia. We have, I don't think you guys carry it, but I was in another shop, a used bookshop, where they're showing, they have a copy of Black Athena. Okay, and the guy who wrote that, I don't think he meant any malice or anything. But to me, it's not an interesting book because it's not really about Africa at all. It's a book where this guy uses the premise that Africans journeyed over to parts of the Mediterranean and used it as a way to reinforce Greek culture. There's bugger all about Africa in it. So they're still doing this where they want to take credit for your accomplishments, or it becomes about them in terms of, look what I discovered about the Africans. And the only people I've ever found who were decent and didn't do that, who really celebrated African achievements and cultures, you've got him in this store. You've got books by Basil Davidson.
Yes.
And, you know, there's Richard Pankhurst. And yes, I'm biased because Richard wrote the foreword from my book, but there are people here and they'll know. Richard Pankhurst did more to help Ethiopian history thrive than, I guess, the only other person who's close to that might be Bawa Zuda. But I go through Richard's stuff and there's paper after paper on everything from Ethiopian photography to the type of epidemics they had, to things in terms of the certain invasions that came to the outlying border areas, and you're going on and going on and going, what didn't you write about, Richard? You know, he covered all this ground. But that was what we call an Africanist who actually cared about Africa. Today you've got these Africanists who are what I call lepidopterists, and they treat an African civilization or even the people like you're a cute specimen that we should study. The African does this, the so-and-so does this. And these are people you don't want anywhere near your culture or your history because they have no empathy. They can never get your point of view, but they have no empathy to look at and say, what's the difference between this being an African thing and just being a human thing? What's the difference between this being a Somali thing or just being something that you might find in terms of just European culture or American culture or something? One of the key points in this book is that Europeans used to go down to African universities to get educated. There's a Pope, Pope Sylvester, I think it's Sylvester II, went to Africa to get educated. Philosophers went to Africa to get educated. They went back home to Europe to spread the ideas. Why don't we teach that? Why isn't anybody giving credit where credit is due for that? So, you know, you're still seeing this go on today, and you can't let them get away with that either.
We won't.
Hell yeah.
And speaking of, I think this is a good time to open up the floor for any questions, comments, critiques. Anyone, and if you have a question, you can just come up to the mic. You come up here, I'll give you the mic. And you can speak from your
and if
your
you
seat.
don't ask a question, I'll sing. So you don't want that.
So who's gonna be first? Not everyone volunteer at once.
I'm thinking of the lyrics now. If you don't get forward and ask a question. Oh, there. Saved.
I I have heard you saying the Egyptians started writing on a stone first, and then created the papers that you can take anywhere and read it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in Ethiopia, it started, and we used skins, lamb skins, goat skins. We call it bran.
Mm-hmm.
That's how it started. And I think, is there any contradiction? They didn't jump straight to paper.
I would be happy as a clam to chart up another Ethiopian innovation. It's just the standard is that they can chart back to find Egyptian papyrus thousands of years. And if they do the isotope checks, like, I'll happily revise this. I mean, that's the point, is we can revise. We can always revise these things and accommodate. But, so I don't have a problem with that at all. If they find out the record. I mean, they found another skeleton recently in Antarctica, and the first thing I thought was, well, what are we going to do about Dinknesh? Well, we might have to revise that. But this is the whole point, is science revises itself and updates its information and interrogates and goes, okay, and you change your opinion according to the facts that evolve and that you learn. So great if we can figure it out. But I haven't heard that before, sir, but the thing is, I would happily revise it if it becomes like standardized fact. So.
You heard it before? Or
No, I'm saying if it becomes standardized fact, I mean, right now, I mean, this is what it comes down to. I read a book once years ago, it was on the history of anthropology. And there was a point where the British in the 1800s were trying to do a theory where they thought that man evolved from Britain. Never mind the point that they're on an island, but they're trying to push this idea. And they first thought that man came out of Asia. And they were doing everything possible until Leakey came along in terms of these gigs, in terms of there. And lo and behold, he goes in Kenya. And so now it takes till we get to the Afar state to find Dinknesh that we get that. So this is a revisional system. So I haven't heard that, but the thing is, when they make it standard, yeah, I'll fix the book. I don't mind it.
Even our Bible is written in skin.
Okay.
It lasts long.
Okay. But we're talking thousands, 3,000, 4,000 BCE. So yeah.
I wanted to make a comment also, just and in your question, but to follow up, we have a book in here. I don't know if it's here now, but it's called Introduction to African Civilization by John G. Jackson. And then he also has a pamphlet, which is called Ethiopia and the Origin of Civilization, where he talks about that Egypt was originally he used the word colony, but originally a colony of Ethiopia. The Ethiopians started, and not just modern, but from the south. The culture came from the south and spread to the north. So I wouldn't be surprised if the writing also started down there and spread to the north. It's just that some records are able to remain for longer, whereas some may, depending on what it was written on, it may disintegrate. What, your question?
The reason why I'm fumbling here is there's new research which got into this book that I discovered. Well, I didn't discover, I just discovered the reading on punt. Because think about where we used to think punt was. Well, now they think it's nowhere near where we thought punt was. I think I haven't thought about this for a while. I think they put punt closer to Eritrea. Whereas we used to think it was further south. So, I mean, this is an ongoing thing with science deciding. So, but yeah, sorry, what was your next question?
Well, mine is more like a comment and maybe a question too. I just also don't think everything that started in Africa started in Ethiopia. I mean, so, yeah, so because we kind of tend to...
Quick, get her!
Yeah, we kind of tend to think like that, and I don't think that's right, because I also think we fall into this this thing where Europeans said Ethiopians are also Caucasians.
Yeah.
And then we get into this, we're a little bit special, and we're not. We're Africans, and some things did get discovered in Ethiopia, others didn't. The reason why Ethiopia is a place, that has this history and this longevity is because we skipped colonialism. We were not colonized, so they could not
Yeah.
come and destroy us like they destroyed most of African countries. But that did not mean it did not exist anywhere else. So I think it's very important, especially for us Ethiopians, to think like that, to rethink how we think about these things.
And again, the scholarship is ongoing. It used to be in the Western scholarship that they thought that you guys went north to go get technology from Europe and get these relics and a wonderful scholar named, I think her name, God, I hope I'm remembering properly, Krebs, said no, and she reread the text and said that's not why they were doing it at all. They're going up there shopping. They're going to get holy relics because they were doing new churches and building this. They didn't need to get technology. How would they know that it was there? So they came down to get the stuff. They wanted like chalices, they wanted silver, and they wanted fine ware for this. So you got that. And in terms of the colonial period, I mean, after all, the Portuguese came down to help you fight Muslims. And then some very smart emperor said, okay, you're done now. Thank you. Bye. Which was the smartest thing anybody ever did. It's like, go, okay, thank you. Bye. And they went, well, wait, we can help you. And it's hilarious because you read the correspondence between the two. And you could do an entire comedy skit of, but we can help you with this. No. Well, I got a great idea. Why don't you go patrol out by this border area? Where is it? Oh, it's really far out there. Keep walking. Keep going. Keep going. Nope, not far enough. To the point where it's almost in the sea. It's like, I think you're missing the point. They just said, bye. And they did that up until the time where you had the, where they came back with the civil war between Suetonius and Phasaelus. So, and which is an amazing episode, which is also in the book. So, and that's an incredible, that story just blows me away, the way that happened. Because, again, there's a chart in there. There is one unfortunate factual error in the chart, but ignore that. Where you can see African achievements compared to what was happening in the West, in Europe. And while you guys had the war between Suetonius and Phasaelus, which was lasting 10 years, if I remember off the top of my head, they had the 30 Years' War. They couldn't get their act together. So you guys sort of resolve your problem and go, okay, that's done. We're going back to the Orthodox Church. What? Meanwhile, the Europeans are going, let's kill each other over what God we believe in. So, yeah, you are special to my mind.
So I have a question.
Okay. But you took yours.
So my question is, because I haven't read your book.
Yeah.
So do you talk about, because we had this fundraiser the other day, and we
Yeah.
had Zarakov, that painting about Zarakov.
Because of mine.
Yeah.
Zarakov, the
I can't
philosopher.
bring it over.
Come up here, speak louder. Okay. You're right.
He has a very good mic.
I have a very good microphone
Okay.
because I worked in radio.
So we had this fundraiser. If you were there, I don't know if you were there.
Yeah, but I can't afford those paintings.
Okay, so one of the paintings was about Zarakov, the Ethiopian philosopher.
Yes.
And by the way, he's the one who donated it, Danyacho, right here. So I'm pointing him out. So Zarakov started his philosophy of rationalism like 100 years before rationalism was discussed in Europe. Did you know about that?
Zarakov is in the book, but
Not the emperor.
yeah, I know. Yeah, no, I know the difference.
So that's very interesting.
René Descartes technically came before Zarakov, but the thing is, to my way of thinking, who cares?
Yeah.
It doesn't make a difference. It's not. People fixate on the firsts.
Yeah.
They fixate on the trivia. The point that we want to always make is that there was an African civilization. There's a chapter in here on languages. New languages were being developed by Africans in the 1800s because they wanted their own. They went, hey, we want a written language. That's still civilization. That's still an achievement, an accomplishment. Sorry?
Yeah, no. My main point that I wanted to make with that was the dialectics.
Yeah.
That was developed at the time. René Descartes was just a little bit around the same time, but later, what happened in the Enlightenment, Zarakov already did. In his thesis.
Yeah, we can quibble over that. I mean, I'd have to go back through Claude Sumner, who is another Canadian. We're so good. And he's the one who really parsed Zara Yakov, and he pretty much puts them as parallel. So, I mean, I have no problem with one coming before the other. To me, it doesn't make a difference. The point is that you have a guy who's coming up with innovative ideas and basically saying the same thing. And what we have is a vacuum where people are going, well, the Europeans did all this. No, they didn't, because we can see the achievements here, and we can chart them. We can see them all the way to the top. You know, and you can draw a line. You can go from Edward Wilmot Blyden to Marcus Garvey. Marcus Garvey getting the pushback by thinkers such as C.L.R. James and George Padmore, who are not African per se, they're from Trinidad, but the point is they were thinking as Africans. You sell a copy of Black Jacobins at the front, you can find right in the page, it says, by the time that I was done with the manuscript, I was no longer thinking of the Caribbean as the place for revolution, as the new home of evolution. I was thinking of Africa. As right in is either his afterword or his introduction. It's right in there. Because he was working for the cause to try to free Ethiopia from the Italian invasion, and brought along all the Pan-African thinkers. And that to me is one of the coolest things I've ever come across, is there's a Chinese restaurant in the middle of Soho in London. And if you were in 1935, you'd walk in and you could see Jomo Kenyatta and Kwame Nkrumah and George Padmore and C.L.R. James. And I would have loved someone to have taken, well, they didn't have selfies, but I would have loved someone to take a photo of that. Mm-hmm. And later on, they're hanging out at Amy Ashwood Garvey's place, Marcus Garvey's ex-wife. And you're going, this is the birth of the Pan-African movement. And it all connects back to the Italian-Ethiopian War. Like, it's amazing. Yeah. And so you see, acquired knowledge has a cultural momentum. These things follow through. Yes, sir.
Actually, was a question and an observation. Like,
is this about your painting and how much you paid?
Can you guys hear? Maybe can
yeah,
you
come on.
Just because it's hard for the people back there.
Unless you're going to pick on my book, in which case I'll take away the book.
If you photograph one and give it to me, then I won't be fine.
Oh, okay. Well, that's just blackmail. That's just
Okay.
extortion.
Yeah. I was going to ask about Zara Yakov.
Yeah.
There,
Yes, you did.
yeah, no, it's a different question. There is a different issue I want to raise. There is a very big question around authorship of Zara Yakov. There was, let me finish.
I go into that.
Yeah, oh, you do? Okay.
I do.
So, along with that, I want to make an observation that what you said earlier, when Africans accomplish something, they are not Africans anymore. They are Caucasian, they're Black Caucasian, whatever.
Yeah.
When something is written by an African, then the question of authorship creeps.
Yeah.
Like Zara Yakov. And
Yeah.
Sumner, by the way, he gave me the copyright for all his books, and I own the copyright. It was a very good
Well,
friend.
then we're going to talk.
Yes. Yeah. And so Zara Yakov's writing was questioned, and Sumner spent an entire life defending that.
Yeah.
And then there is the question of, if you remember the book, They Came Before Columbus.
Yes.
Van
It depends on
Sertima.
that too. Yeah.
Okay. I remember, what was this guy, Siegel?
The author of the book?
No, the author is Van Sertima.
Yeah.
But this guy who had a program on PBS called Cosmos.
Carl Sagan.
Yeah, he was having a discussion about the book, and he said, "This is a sad, bad joke." This is the exact word he used to describe Van Sertima's book about Black people having been in South America before Columbus. I don't know, you know
Yeah,
about
well,
that?
here, I'll answer your question. The thing is, well, there's 2 points. One is you allude to something which isn't in the book. It's in the concluding remarks chapter, which I lay out certain themes. There are negative themes and positive themes that Africans have had to deal with. A lot of it is part of my language because unfortunately there are little kids here, so I can't swear. I want to swear so badly. But it's what I call, for some reason, well, we know the reasons because it's racism. They want to have what I call the authenticity of experience. Justify your civilization. Justify that you did this. Now, I will tell you that from a scientific point of view, I'm not a scientist, but we can take a scientific point of view, I would have issues with Van Sertima's works. And so would Wallace Soyinka. Wallace Soyinka and others would say there's no reason that you have to invent other accomplishments. You have enough accomplishments. You don't have to invent these alternative things. I don't know whether he had an issue with Van Sertima personally, but that would be his argument. But you're quite correct. It's a case of, well, prove to us that you did this. And as the gentleman said, Zara Yacob's work was put in doubt, and Sumner said, no, it ain't. The guy that they're claiming faked it wouldn't even have known enough geese.
Exactly.
Yeah, so this is rubbish. I relied on Sumner's. I hope I haven't got myself in trouble because I'm quoting from Sumner's stuff and you own the copyright.
We'll talk about that.
I'm sorry, you can't have the money now. But, I mean, Sumner was a smarter guy than me. I mean, the guy, I presume that Sumner could read Amharic. He must have been fluent enough to go through this. I wish I did. He devoted his life to parsing this stuff. He was one of these guys who was on the right side of the angels in terms of saying, let's venerate African thinkers and innovators. Where I quibble is, okay, like there's a young woman, as an example I give in the book, there's a young woman who wrote an article and you just want to go, because she claimed, she claimed that, she was gullible, and she claimed that you could see that Africans were aware of the moons of Jupiter and were able to see them. No, that's impossible. That's impossible to the naked eye. It's impossible to the naked eye. That's an African eye or a European eye. The point is that obviously word got to these Africans through travel, or somebody came by and said, hey, by the way, Jupiter has moons. The flip side of that is that there were Africans who knew about the heliocentric system and figured it out centuries before Europeans did. It's not just me saying that. Even Michael Palin, when he did his series on Sahara, did that and pointed out, and he was looking at the manuscripts. It was either in Timbuktu or another university, and pointed to the book. So, I mean, you've got plenty of firsts like that. There's no need to even quibble. The issue is these guys who come along and go, well, prove it. With something like the moons of Jupiter, okay, yeah, dumb. And I blame the reporter for that. I blame the stupidity of the educational system that doesn't point out to where the problem. For Van Sertima, well, we can argue that another time. You're old enough to remember Kontiki, right? Yeah, so I mean, we can go back and forth over that. It's a case of having an open mind, of saying, okay, well, could they? Okay, is it possible?
Well, yeah, he studied oceanography, the ocean currents, and it is very possible, yes.
Yeah, and for me, there's no investment of emotion in this. I lose nothing by acknowledging an African accomplishment. It doesn't take away anything from me. You know, I'm not going to be poorer tomorrow. Well, maybe I will be because you might not buy the book. But this is the problem. When Ben Shapiro writes a crap book that's only this big, because of course his readers can't be taxed too much, claiming that all the founding ideas come from Western Christianity and from American founding fathers who were not Christians, by the way, but were deists or atheists. This guy is churning out propaganda and selling bad history. We don't want that. And the difference is that we've seen African history as propaganda sold in softer form up until roughly, what would you say, 1960s, 70s at least, where we still had that nonsense going on? within our lifetimes, you and me. So I mean, this is, as I say in the book, this is the start of a conversation. This is not the final word. Somebody will come along 20 years from now, I hope 30, 40 years after I'm dead, and go, well, Pearce got this wrong, and got this wrong, and I won't be around to go, ooh. But somebody will fix it, and somebody will say, okay, you got a couple of things right. But it's not really about him anyway. It's about setting the record straight in terms of African accomplishments.
Second edition.
Yeah, updated and fixed by you.
Yes.
Because you'll still be alive, and I'll be, dead for my sins. So, any other questions? Anybody else?
Well, I have a question.
Okay.
So, you mentioned something about cesarean section being performed in Uganda.
I really clawed myself in the head,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. There's a big bruise there.
Yeah. And you mentioned some other, and one of our guests mentioned, not being overly focused on the accomplishments of Ethiopia. So I was wondering, I saw you had a chapter in here about Steve Biko, and what are some of the other, from Central, any discoveries from Central Africa or Southern or West Africa that you can speak on?
Well, yeah. John Shalembwe is in there, if I'm pronouncing his name properly, from Malawi, because Malawi doesn't get much love. I mean, and this guy's on their money. And this guy was leading, an uprising in terms of trying to free the country. It didn't work out too well for him or others, but the point is he's a hero to them and should be in there. And he was saying very interesting things. I'll leave that for you to discover. I don't want to elaborate too much, but it's very cool what he says. And again, you compare that with what white American and European radicals were saying at the same time. You go, this guy was so friggin' righteous. And I'm going, why isn't this guy celebrating? Biko is in there because Biko was, everybody knows Biko, everybody knows the song, a lot of people know the movie, even though it's an older generation, like those of us who know the movie, but nobody ever reads him. And he had cool things to say about Ubuntu, about Black consciousness. There's stuff in there about Botswana in terms of Seretse Khama, because this guy was so cool. There's stuff in there about, I don't go into a lot of political leaders because that would mean just trying to rewrite the colonial narrative all over again, and I didn't want to do that. George Ayitte is in there from Ghana, and he'll probably piss off a few people because his ideas are very right of center and also very critical of African leaders. And his way of thinking, it doesn't matter what I think, whether I share his opinion or not, it's just interesting. His way of thinking is just because he looks at it as, I'm paraphrasing here, I don't want to malign his views, but he's basically saying, okay, you can't keep using the excuse of colonialism forever in terms of explaining your bad governance or your corruption. So, and I interviewed him. I've interviewed him at least twice, and he actually took his studies in my home city of Winnipeg. And he's an interesting guy to talk to. You may not agree with what he has to say, but it's a different perspective. And I also interviewed Asfo Wosanasarate, and he's got a different take on certain issues. So even the issue of colonialism itself is something that not every African will agree on, or perhaps should they. There's a multitude of views. So it sort of follows where the ideas go, not so much the geography per se.
So that leads me to this question about how, what makes the cut? How does one of the gifts of Africa, how did they make the cut for the book? Or what was your selection process?
Ooh.
Because it seems to be a wide variety of things here.
Well, yeah, because you have to go, okay, because people tend to focus, again, on novelty. They tend to focus on the parade of novelties to say, oh, Benin, like, yeah, I can rattle those off too. Benin City had public street lighting. European cities often were in the dark. You know, sun goes down, stumble around, get beaten up, blah, blah, blah. You can walk down the streets of Benin City with lamps safely. You're fine. You know, that's cool. But, okay, that sort of would be something that you can find on the internet in a trivia list. The whole point is to go, okay, where does all this go to? Where all these ideas go to? Where does the philosophy of this lead to this? How does this tie into, how does Leo Africanus tie into this theme and tie into this? And how does Blyden get to Garvey? And how does Garvey get to James? And how do we get to Wangari Maathai in terms of environmentalism? How do we get to these other guys? So I don't even know if the cut was a conscious decision, because what I wanted to do was make this book accessible. So you won't find a lot of dry philosophical treatises in this. You know, it's not a case of, well, we're just going to deal with philosophy or all this. I want something tangible. When you look at what Diop does, Job, sorry, I learned something. This is a guy who set out to master multiple disciplines to bring his ideas home. That's incredible. The guy said, okay, I can't just learn about chemistry. I also have to learn about this. And I also have to learn about literature. And I have to learn about, and you're going, wow. And that's amazing. So right away, there's, they keep disappearing. Right away, you're going, okay, and where are the connections back? There's a guy in there, Bilali, who is a black Spartacus. This guy led a slave revolt in Africa that nobody really knows about. And he did it for 30 years, and he won against his own African kings. And Blyden knew him. So you go, doop, 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 and you can connect the dots all the way through. It's amazing. And as I say, this is a start of a conversation, but this ain't the end. I'll bet you anybody here could look at these guys and go, well, you forgot this one, you forgot, or make other connections. And to which I say, go write another book. Go write a different book. You know, go write your book, and we'll have more out there, because so it has company. You know?
Yeah, and my question is, when somebody takes an endeavor such as this, writing about Africa, or for instance, this guy wrote about the Ark and the Covenant.
Graham Hancock?
Hancock, for instance.
Yeah.
He wanted to follow the trail of the Ark, right? So
Yeah.
it took him, he did like intellectual archaeology, and he went to Ethiopia and so forth.
Yeah.
That motivated him. Some other guy, this lawyer guy, who wanted to disprove his wife wrong, that evangelical Christ is bogus. So he started reading the Bible and studying it, and he ended up writing a book about the case for Christ. So something drives you to do something else.
Yeah.
What drove you to write about a white boy from Winnipeg? Why did you have to go and write about African contribution to civilization?
Why not? Why not? I mean,
there's a disconnect there. Why not doesn't connect? There, like this. The reason I give these examples is because this guy wanted to track the Ark of the Covenant, so he read the Bible. Where does it stop talking about the Ark? Blah blah blah, and then he goes.
No, I get the question, but the thing is, you underestimate the power of curiosity. People used to ask me why I wrote Prevail. And there's always people who are looking for, I have an Ethiopian girlfriend, or I have a child, or something. There are two people in the audience who have met my current girlfriend. My current girlfriend is a white European. You know, there's no like personal connection that inspires, and nor should there have to be. It should be sufficient that the information is out there and is enough to tantalize your mind. And
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah.
In the absence of information, you're being told that there's nothing. Even Africans are being told that you didn't contribute anything to civilization.
Which is a crime.
Yes, it is. But my question is, in the absence of information, you went after it.
Yeah.
Okay, so.
But that's the point. There's no absence of information. What there is a sometimes deliberate attempt to obscure the information, which I deeply blankety blank resent.
Okay,
You
so
know,
that's,
I wish I
that's
could
it
swear
then,
in this
you know.
story, but I deeply damn well resent. I resent ignorance that's willful. I resent deliberate stupidity. I resent the cruelty of enforcing ignorance.
Yeah.
And
I
it-
got the answer.
yeah, it pisses me off. Well, unfortunately, you started something. But the thing is, you got your answer, but the thing is, you're going to get the extra because why the hell aren't there other people out there like me? That's what drives me crazy. Is okay, it's nice to have the novelty. I'm the only white guy perhaps in this store at the moment. Why the hell aren't there others? That's what drives me crazy. Why the hell aren't there others like me who, for instance, cared about Ethiopia today over the war that we all are talking about? They ain't out there. And it ticks me off. And as I said the other night, this book is about civilization. And if you believe in civilization and education, then you have to believe that Africa has one. Instead of going, well, we're just going to teach our kids about Europe and about China, you know, and maybe we'll give some credit sometimes to Japan. Not good enough. Not good enough to that little person who was squalling earlier. What's he going to grow up and believe? You know, we got to do better. And that sounds very pious coming from somebody who looks like me, who's a bald guy, but the thing is, it ticks me off. It's the most honest answer I can give.
More people are like that.
Sorry? Yeah, old people are like that. Yeah. I'm a very angry, nasty, mean curmudgeon, and I'm ticked off. You know? You don't see this stuff. So, yes.
I think, I'm sorry.
Yes, young lady, what do you
Yes, I want to ask you a question.
Yeah.
I think you may have been answering something related to what, you know, we talked about the other day. It was like, why do you have this, you know, why do you care about Africa or whatever? But I wanted to kind of build on something else. You mentioned, I haven't got to this part in the book, but when we were discussing the transatlantic slave trade,
Yeah.
and then I think you mentioned that there was some letters or protests or something written by.
Yeah, African kings have
African.
written at least, I think there's two examples of the book. There's at least one in which a king said, what, could you knock it off? Like, you know, you're depleting our actual population in terms of doing this. And that's because you always hear, all of you have heard this all your lives, saying, well, you sold yourselves into slavery. Yeah, so did Europeans. But sorry, I interrupted
Yeah,
you.
no, actually, I mean, you hit on it. We were talking about, and you're talking about the lack of, you know, I would say lack of access to information,
Yeah.
not the lack of information in itself, because they deliberately make sure that the access of it is, you know, not there, so people don't learn. But
Yeah.
so to build on this intentional erasure of the history of African civilizations and the deliberate disconnection of African Americans, diasporans from the continent, right? And then you mentioned that letter or those letters in your book, and I think it's very significant, you know, that even happened and that was documented. I just wanted to know, like, how did you discover that? How did you discover that? Because I never even heard about that.
I went looking for that, and the thing is, I wasn't going to retell the entire history of the slave trade because that would be counterproductive. But what I wanted to do was go, because it's counterintuitive, it makes no sense. It's the same way that people used to treat when I was growing up, I was watching The World at War, or the war years, because my dad was just slightly old enough, young enough that he never went with his brothers to do the Second World War. So he watched the Second World War on television. That's what their generation did. So growing up there, and they portrayed Holocaust victims as these passive creatures that just wandered, you know, were led like cattle into the cattle cars and then taken off. And of course, that isn't true either. There was resistance to Nazism. There was not just the Warsaw Ghetto, but you had people fighting. So we also have this image that, oh, African slaves just went willingly, you know, in the same way, or we don't even have the perception of what kind of resistance is there. There's no discussion of it. And you've got, I think you must have books on here. You can teach me the pronunciation of her name too, Queen Njinga.
Yeah.
You know, this woman, now granted, she did deal in some slave dealing, but she also kicked ass. I mean, this is the type of woman who, when a European diplomat or whatever, the famous story where he wants to meet with her and he's sitting on a chair and she walks in and there's no chair for her. So she goes, two women or what is it? They make themselves into a chair for her to sit down. It's like, okay, creep, like, let's talk. And there's a story in the book about, you know, they're pursuing her. And it's like something of a Marvel movie. She literally, the entire force that's with her, fight these guys off while she climbs down a rope like Lara Croft to get down there. I'm going, no one is going to believe this. Like, this is incredible. And there's a wonderful historian who I believe is with Howard University, whose work I depend on, who wrote an entire biography of her. So the stuff is out there. The unfortunate thing is, a lot of this stuff, and that's part of the reason why this book is written the way it is, it's written for you and you and you as a general reader. A lot of the stuff that's valuable is written for professors in academic papers just for other professors, which does a disservice to your kids and you, because you're going, well, where the hell can I got to read through this guy's terrible style to find like a grain of information. And it's very difficult. I mean, I went looking for a book on Reconstruction. Now, there, as far as I could find, I'm in Washington, D.C., for crying out loud. There's W.E.B. Du Bois' book, which is sold in this store. There's a copy right there. Yep, he's pointing to it. And there's Eric Foner's. And you pick up Eric Foner's in Barnes & Noble, or you pick it up somewhere where I picked mine up at Barnes & Noble. And Foner's style is fine, but immediately as you open it, it's like got a gazillion footnotes on virtually every page. And people are going to go, there are some people who don't like that. So you've lost part of your audience there. We need stuff which is accessible. That's the whole point why this store has books for kids. And why it has so many books for children to get in early. Get hooked on this. Get hooked on this cool stuff that you didn't know before. It's for you. And then learning to find those other sources becomes second nature. I can't remember how old your kids are, but the thing is, when they're old enough, like my father used to drive me insane because my generation, we didn't have the internet. We had Collier's Encyclopedia. So my father reflexively would say, go look it up in the encyclopedia, to the point where you were going, damn, and going, ooh, and you can pick up the volume and dig through and go. But that's not just reading, that's actually teaching you how to do research. And we don't teach that anymore. It's for children. We go, look, it's the internet. I can click on this. And then read a stupid article where somebody thinks you can see the moons of Jupiter with your naked eye, which you can't. So, you know, hope that answers your question.
Yes, go ahead.
Hi, how are you?
I'm fine.
Okay, I'm sorry that I wasn't sure.
Okay.
Hi, but I really wanted to speak to early education with our students and teaching this to them early. I teach at Howard and I also teach at the University of Nebraska, Omaha.
Okay.
And at the end of the course, I teach Intro to Contemporary Africa here. I teach on Black women at the University of Nebraska. But often I hear, once I introduce many topics on Africa and early African history, especially everything is pre-colonial, and then make, you know, my way on through. Many other things they say is like, wow, I wish I would have known this. I wish somebody would have taught this to me while I was in high school. And these are both white and black students at the university, right?
Yes.
Different ages. Where at Howard, of course, you know, is mainly black students and within a certain age group between that 18 to 21, 22. But here you have people who are returning to school at the other university. And it's just like, I just wish I would have had that experience. And I'm hearing it from black students as well who went to predominantly white institutions as well as white students. And they're like, I never knew my idea of Black people, Black history is the little bit that they give us, or what I see on social media, or off of TV, or catch on a program. And then many Black students, they find out and they're like, oh my God, all I ever knew of my history was slavery. So that becomes an issue even in public districts or public schools where it's predominantly Black. They start at slavery as opposed to being able to share the many gifts as you shared here in the book, and it distorts their image of themselves, you know, and who they are. So they feel so empowered and liberated in a sense because they're like, now I have this knowledge, and with this I can battle with it. You know, I know who I am in this world, and so much more to offer. And I just think it is so important. Many things that you mentioned, I can't wait to read it, can't wait to share. A lot of these things I discuss in my class, even Black women in America. I start off talking about early African history and women. I mean, just a broad range beyond the queens, because it's just so important to understand that to get to the Middle Passage and on. So, in your work, like I said, I want to get, and then you have my boy and Biko. That's my dude. I did my research on Biko.
Look, there's even a case example in there. I can't remember if it's Uganda again or not, because it's been a while since I've read my own book. But the thing is, there's what's called the Women's War, where they did a protest against colonial officers who were probably British, because the British went everywhere. And just, we want you to know how to run your country. But these women, the women were the one who decided the protest. And the men were going, we're not ready for that. Yes, you are. And they go out and kick their ass. And they pulled in, the colonial overseers, if I remember the story correctly, were going to round up the men to question them. And they're going, well, we don't really have anything to do with this. It's not really us, it's the women. And they're going, really? And then they tried to, and the women were just, nope. We're not having it. They didn't do this divide and rule crap that they were trying to force on them. They went, it's amazing. I mean, there are countless examples of strong African women archetypes throughout history that you can draw on. And I mean, you say it starts with slavery. What the hell message does that tell a child? Right. To go, okay, this is the start of your history. Great, you're in bondage and wonderful. Like, what does that say? I don't want to teach my kid that. So no, I'm fully on board with your message. Yeah.
I can't wait to add your book to my selection. I give away books. I love to do book giveaways.
You can buy more copies and give them away. I like that.
Yeah, I will definitely make sure it's on the list to share at my next one.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That's very kind of you.
You make a really, really good point about that. And I'm a teacher as well. I work with middle school students and high school students. But I work in an African-centered school. So actually what you're talking about, they do learn this stuff from a young age. And you actually can see the difference. Because now it frees their mind up to be more exploratory, because they already have a foundation in their history and culture. It's like, okay, now what impact do I want to make on the world, versus like how you mentioned, Dr. Tracy, when they're only exposed to this information in college, by that time their life is already taken a trajectory in a certain direction. So now they have to figure, okay, well, I'm pre-med, or I'm a bio major, or computer science. They don't necessarily have time, to study all the African history and the culture that they would have been able to. But had they gotten that information at a young age, then it's already in them. Now they can go off and become a rocket scientist, with a perspective that they're going to use their knowledge to help African people.
This is how stupid we are. My generation never knew that Somalis were busy trading with China. The Chinese came over to the Somali coast. We know this because we found actual China ware, Chinese pottery and other things, and ceramics in Africa that could only come from China. We know that they traded with China. That changes your entire world perspective. Your mind goes, whoa, which means that there had to be a reasonably sophisticated civilization to go, okay, here's stuff for you. We know that like a Chinese emperor had 2 giraffes given to him by African kings. Boom, like right away, you change that kid's view of, and there's a famous painting in a kind of parchment where you see the Chinese writing, and you see the emperor, and he's got 2 giraffes, and you're going, okay, where do you get those from? Well, completely changes your mindset. The minute you do that, you say, okay, boom, completely changes perspective, and we should.
I just wanted to thank you for that, and I just wanted to finish what I was saying. The flip side of I've worked with youth who haven't been, brought up in an Afrocentric or African-centered educational system, where they didn't have parents putting them in programs, where when they hear the word history, they oftentimes already are averse to history. They don't want to learn history because every time they're in school and they talk about Black history, it's always something that's some sort of a struggle or some sort of where we're being defeated or struggling to defeat something. So it kind of creates in their mind like history is associated with feelings that they don't really want to have. But when you actually start to teach them, okay, yes, these bad things happen, but these good things also happen, and life is a combination of bad and good, then they become more of a holistic person.
The other thing too is they teach history badly because they don't make it. My job as a writer is to entertain. Now, you're a teacher, so the thing is, you're not there to entertain, but you must engage your pupils. So the thing is, you've heard me clown, you've heard me be comedic this evening, or you've heard me being a jackass, and I do a lot of that. But the thing is, some of this stuff is absolutely hilarious. I mean, I'm busy writing a new history of Ethiopia. And I haven't got to the chapter yet, but I put in another article or something. And I'm going to mispronounce his name probably, but Ras Mikhail, if you're familiar with him, in the 1700s, was brought down from Tigray. Yeah, thank you. And he gets brought down. And I'll just say Mikhail so you don't have to listen to my tortured Amharic pronunciation. This guy gets brought down from Tigray because the woman who is the regent in terms of the young emperor thinks, well, I've got to bring this guy in for the power play. And this guy, Mikhail, comes down, and he's not having this. This is very Game of Thrones stuff, where he goes, you guys can't even protect your own damn capital. Well, you need something like martial law here. And he starts hanging criminals, and he starts kicking ass. And now the family that like all the machinations going, oh crap, what do we bring down here? Oh shit, this guy wants to take over. And he does. And there's a great story where they decide the emperor grows a little older and he wants to get rid of him. And so he hires an assassin. And the assassin has a rifle, probably a blunderbuss. And he's off at the palace. And Mikhail is getting fanned by a dwarf with a thing. And the assassin points the rifle through the window, fires, and the dwarf is there fanning him and boom, and falls to the ground. And Mikhail looks out the window, sees the assassins from the palace window and goes, the emperor wants to kill me. And you're going, you couldn't make this stuff up. The guy hits the dwarf. So the next day, he goes off to a battle, sends the emperor the message, said, it would be really great if the emperor joined me in a battle to defend the country. And the emperor sends back a note saying, I'm kind of busy. I'm pretty sure that you can do this yourself. And Mikhail sends back a message going, no, I'm really sure I need your strength and your moral fortitude to be here. No, I can't come. And so he hides. Mikhail comes back, wins his battle, poisons him, then gets another guy, and the other guy's an older guy who was just minding his own business, and he just doesn't want anything to do with this. And Mikhail goes, well, you can win great battles. And the guy goes, I don't want to win great battles. Well, you can have great women. Well, I don't want to have lots of beautiful women. And so finally Mikhail poisons that guy. So now he's poisoned 2 emperors. And it goes on, and it's like a comedy of errors. You're watching this is your history. And you have to laugh, because if you don't, like, it's just absurd. It's just absurd that this was going on. There are lots of terrible, horrible moments in Ethiopian history, just as there are in English history, just as there are in French history. But when you have a guy trying to assassinate a guy with a blunderbuss rifle and shoots a dwarf holding a fan, I think you're entitled to make a joke out of that for your students. Because I just think, wow.
At the expense of the dwarf.
Sorry?
At the expense of the dwarf.
Well, yeah, the little persons, but I mean, the guy was a martyr to the cause. I mean, well, the flip side of it is to me, the most impressive, amazing, one of the most amazing episodes of the medieval period was when Faisal told off his father and said, "What are you doing? We're not even killing Muslims, we're killing our own kind. We're killing our brothers. And there's 8,000 dead." And Sisinios hears that and goes, "Oh my God, what have I done?" And lets things go back to tolerance. And of course, Faisal makes it harder afterwards, but in the long run, Sisinios advocates. But you have the serious and the somber mixed with the absurd and the comical, and you tell and teach history that way and make it entertaining and engaging along the way.
And I think this has been a very entertaining and engaging night. I hope you all agree. Thank you all for coming. We do have a limited amount of books here with us, but anyone who wants to can order the books from us, and they'll be there to you within a week. So thank you all. Thank you, Mr. Pearce. And if anyone wants to, hang around, you guys feel free. We're still open. You guys can hang around and have a good time.
Someone can buy this copy.
And yes, he can.
Sorry?
If you want him to sign the book, you can definitely sign.
Am I off the hook for the copy?